in the fanfiction community. There are some fanfics so awesome or so repulsed that sometimes they deserve a live read. This is his story. Hello again, our fellow YouTubers out there in all points west. I just want to let you know, Jim, your lights are on. Okay, that's probably not the guy's name, but that was one thing to make fun, to try to scare all the people who are named Jim in the world. Well, since tomorrow is going to be Sailor Moon Crystal back on the air, and I've already read my prerequisite bad fanfic. Take that, Trixie. Just wait till next time. Oh, it's going to be Von Doom heaven for you. I decided that today we are going to do another Sailor Moon fanfic in honor of the fact that Crystal's coming out next with one of a lot of people's favorite senshi. No, not Ami-chan, but Makoto. Also, the girl who seeks to commit suicide. So I decided to read an interesting one today. Well, it sounded interesting from the summary. It's called Wish Upon a Star. So, we here at the Treeberry Memorial Library are proud to present Wish Upon a Star. Wish Upon a Star by Sturderkin1750. A shooting star. What did you wish for? That's a secret. And you, Setsuna? That's a secret.
That's not fair.
And what did you wish for?
There is nothing we wished for. This is our happiest moment. Isn't it, Haruka?
It is. Maybe she should have wished for everything to stay as it was, Michiru thought 3 months later, as she looked down into the hospital bed where Hotaru lay. The girl's face was pale and haggard, the lips chapped and cracked open. She looked as if she had been ill for months, even though it had only been over a week since the child had been sent home from school with a slight fever. That's when it had started. At first, they thought it was a mere cold and had put Hotaru to bed, but it worsened by day and day, and now she forced herself to look away from the many needles and tubes which stuck into Hotaru's frail little body, and her stomach clenched painfully. Nobody knew what ailed the girl. The doctors were not able to find anything, and even Ami and Mamo-chan, who had finished his medical duties by now, couldn't find any cause for the illness, even though they spent every minute researching and hardly got any sleep. They were lucky to have been admitted at all into the hospital room, Setsuna, Haruka, and her, as they were no relatives. In order to finally be allowed to stay, they had to appeal to Ami's mother for help. A few steps away, Setsuna and Haruka were discussing silently where they should fetch Hotaru's father so he could see his daughter for what might be the last time. But how they were supposed to explain to the man that the fatally ill 12-year-old girl was the same child as his 1-year-old daughter whom Setsuna fetched last year. He had lost all his memories after all. A small knock caused her to look up. At the window which connected the hospital room to the corridor, Yusaki, Mamo, Ami, Rei, Minako, and Makoto were standing. Yusaki's eyes were brimming with tears as she looked at Hotaru. Tears which Michiru hadn't allowed herself to cry yet, even though her composure wasn't far from crumbling down. Yusaki had appealed several times to her sensei to allow her to heal Hotaru with the silver crystal, but they could not allow their princess to risk her life, however much they wished for Hotaru to get well again. Michiru glanced over at Ami and Mamo, but both shook their heads dejectedly. No news then. Nothing she expected it. Her mirror showed her nothing but death. A Ray's defeated face betrayed that she saw the same in the fire. Soon a doctor appeared and talked to the group, shaking her head several times. Probably she told him that he couldn't enter the room, as so many times before. The doctors didn't want to take any chances. Even though there was no indication of the illness being contagious, they didn't admit any visitors for the girls' 3 guardians who refused to leave the room anyways. At last, the girls and Mama left dejectedly. Ami held her little computer up as she caught Michiru's eyes and tried to smile encouragingly, failing miserably. Dusk fell and bathed the room in a calm twilight. Michiru started suddenly as a fluorescent lamp flickered and the doctor entered the room. She shuddered and folded her arms to warm herself a little. Haruka, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened up and came toward the bed, where she took her place behind the chair in which Mishiro was sitting. She leaned back slightly when she felt Haruka's hand on her shoulder, seeking to comfort her and touch.
I'm afraid I don't have news for you,
the doctor said and sighed as he finished examining their adopted daughter.
Her condition keeps worsening by the hour. I am very sorry, but I don't think she will live to see the morning.
Haruka's fingers dug painfully into her shoulder. Is there nothing you could do? She asked, and Mishiro could hear how much strain her voice was to keep calm. Haruka was probably the only one of them who still truly believed that Hotaru might be saved. Mishiro was unable to ignore what the scene in her mirror relayed to her, and Setsuna neither appeared surprised at the doctor's words. If the wind told Haruka the same, she fiercely ignored it. The doctor shook her head.
I don't understand what's happening. I never expected something like that with a child. It's as though her body has resigned fighting, as though she wanted to leave this world.
Unconsciously, Mishiro wrapped her arms around herself more tightly.
Wanted to leave? Why should Hotaru want to leave them? Was it her fault? Had it hurt Hotaru more than she had admitted that Haruka and her had pretended to turn against them? To turn against their own family and took their star seeds?
The door clunked shut as the doctor left the room again. She realized the warmth of Haruka's hand was missing now, and she did not want to raise her head to note that Haruka had taken her post to the wall again.
Mishiro Mama? Haruka Papa? Setsuna Mama?
All three startled, as they heard a small voice. Hotaru was faintly smiling at them. The shades under her sunken eyes were now even more pronounced under her violet irises, and Mishiro moved her chair closer to take the pale hand into hers. Setsuna sat down at the edge of her bed, and Haruka stepped close to the bed as well, squatting down.
Hotaru?
Mishiro didn't know which one of them had spoken. Maybe it was all three of them. The girl looked up into a moment, and to their tired, sad faces and spoke again, although with noble effort.
Please don't be sad. I didn't want to cause you grief. All I did was wish for her to grow up as a normal girl only once, together with Chibi Yusa. I never thought...
A coughing fit shook her body. She closed her eyes for a moment and opened them again with difficulty.
Sigh.
And she closed her eyes this time. They didn't open again. The machines attached to her little body went mad, and immediately the two doctors came rushing into the room, probably alerted by the machines, but they were only able to confirm the girl's death. Mishiro did not remember exactly what happened afterwards. A seemingly endless mass day of gray days followed, which she spent either shut into the music room with her violin or on the shore. There hadn't been a funeral, and so Taru's body simply dissolved, to the doctor's horror, but only to the mild astonishment of the senshi. Haruka was similarly affected by grief, even though she didn't shut herself in, but rather drove her car as well as her body to so far unknown speeds. When Mishiro resurfaced from her own world, she felt that she had been far from mourning a second loss, which probably would have hit her harder. Setsuna seemed to be able to handle the loss better. Fleetingly, Mishiro wondered whether she knew more about Hotaru's death than she was allowed to reveal, or whether she had accustomed herself in the course of the millennia with the tides of birth and death holding her companions prisoner. Still, she spent suddenly much more time guarding the time portal than necessary. She seemed barely able to be at home and close to her companions. Only half a year later, when at least semblance of normality had returned, and she came often again. Don't worry, folks, we're not stopping there. 4 years later. I have to go. See you tonight! Haruka rushed down the stairs, gave her a quick kiss, and left the house.
Have a nice day,
Ichiro called after her, and the door clunked loudly. The water boiled and she poured it into a teapot. She still had half an hour left before she had to leave the house, and so she sat down at the table to enjoy her morning tea. Today was a quiet day. She only had an orchestra rehearsal until 3 o'clock. Since 3 years, she was studying the violin and painting at the Tokyo University of the Arts.
An unusual combination, but in case of Messire Kaio, they gladly made an exception. However, the double subject also meant that her timetable was mostly quite full, and on top of that, she naturally still worked as a violinist and an artist. Only now, with her fourth and final year at university starting, her timetable had relaxed a little. Haruka was studying mechanical engineering at Keio University, along with her racing, which she didn't quit either, of course. Her schedule was as full as Mashiru's, or even fuller, for while Mashiru brought perfection in what she was best at already, there was a big difference in winning car races and learning how to build them. The other girls were well devoted themselves to their dreams, even though no one knew how much time was left until the advent of Crystal Tokyo. Ami was a medical student at Tokyo U, while Makoto worked as apprentice to one of Tokyo's finest cooks, a one Sanji Prince. Rei dedicated herself to the work at her shrine and Shinto teachings, and Minako studied dance and singing at a drama school. Usagi had very half-heartedly started studying political science of all things, apparently believing that this course of study would best prepare her for her role as future queen. But Michiru doubted she would ever finish it. She wasn't even sure how often she had actually attended the lectures. Instead, she occupied her time with working very enthusiastically in a kindergarten, and 2 months ago she had finally married her Mamo, who was a junior doctor now. For the past months, she had kept her sensei busy with writing prep and the wedding itself, and I think you could even notice that there was a slight bump forming on Usagi. I mean, after all, as many times as those two went at it, I wouldn't be surprised. And wait, is this fic actually focusing on the girls' dreams? Wow, something I haven't seen since Jetwolf. Hungry fanfic! Setsuna still lived with them, and was studying astrophysics at the moment, even though she had been claiming for years that she wanted to start training as a fashion designer soon. Recently, however, her presence at the time gate was almost constantly demanded. She had hardly seen her since the wedding. She finished the rest of her tea, and her stomach clenched painfully. She pulled her legs up to her stomach, hoping that it would calm down again. She had been feeling unwell for days, and wondered whether she should go see a doctor after the rehearsal today. Since Hotaru had fallen ill and died so suddenly, she had developed a strong aversion against hospitals and clinics, as they reminded her in cruel detail of Hotaru's death, and so she postponed it again and again. She took her bathing suit and a towel along. She planned on spending her free afternoon in a pool, and finally left the house, taking the subway to the concert hall. Despite everything Haruka had predicted her, she hadn't lost her desire for normality, and if all Tokyo was taking the subway, she was taking it well. Monsieur Kaio, right? The nurse entered the information into the computer. Please, take a seat. We will call you in soon. Monsieur nodded and sat down. It was quite a big clinic close to the concert hall where her rehearsal had taken place today. After her upset stomach had forced her to run to the toilet twice during today's rehearsal, she had unhappily decided, at last, to visit a doctor. As soon as she was called, it followed the nurse to the doctor's office. A middle-aged doctor greeted her friendly. You are suffering from nausea, then? She asked after taking a look at her computer screen, where the nurse had apparently entered some information. When did it start? A couple of days. Maybe a week. Monsieur replied uncertainly. She hadn't paid attention that closely, and it had become worse by and by. She looked out the window for a moment. The winds of warm afternoon sunlight fell into the room, trying to rid herself of the anxiety the clinic caused her. Are you constantly feeling sick during the day? The doctor prompted further. Miss Kyle? She forced herself to redirect her attention to her conversation partner. What's he had asked? Yes. No, it keeps getting better and worse all day. The doctor nodded. Do you have any other symptoms? No, I'm only feeling sick. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with me. She wondered whether she would be allowed to leave now. Now that she had actually described her indisposition to the doctor, it sounded quite trivial. Surely she could leave. However, she was disappointed, as the doctor continued her questioning. When was your last period? Monsieur blinked surprised. When had the last time been? She never paid any particular attention to it. It had always been quite irregular. Finally she remembered and replied, About 2 months ago. The doctor nodded and took a note. as though she had found a theory confirmed. Surely she didn't think, but is it out of the question that I'm pregnant? Monsieur added quickly. Is that right? The doctor looked at her for a moment. I would still like to perform a blood test, Miss Kaio, simply to rule this possibility out, and maybe obtain some further results. It might also be an upset stomach, of course, but it is unusual that you would have no other symptoms. Monsieur nodded politely, and even though she would rather have risen and left the office right away, if she had known this in advance, she would have gone to see the doctor. This could take hours. She endured having a sample of her blood taken, and then sat down outside again to wait for the results. For one moment she closed her eyes. She didn't sleep well recently, and felt exhausted catch up with her while she waited. Living with Haruka, I can imagine why. She was startled as the nurse called her in again. Had she finally fallen asleep? Hurriedly, she took her violin case and her bag with her swimming utensils, and followed the nurse back to the doctor's office. The doctor motioned for her to sit down at her desk. I suppose I may offer my congratulations, Miss Kaio. The doctor started hesitantly. It seems like you are expecting a child after all. Monsieur laughed uncertainly. This is not a funny joke, Doctor. What nonsense is this? The doctor shook her head and frowned. I am not joking, Miss Kyle. You mentioned before that you believed it impossible for you to be pregnant. May I, Miss Kyle? Monsieur shook her head. The room became blurry, outlines melting away. She gripped the arms of her chair very slightly, in search for support. She couldn't hear properly anymore, and she noticed vaguely how the doctor called for help. She was saluted from both sides and led a few steps away. So please, lay down here, all right? The two pairs of hands helped her lie down on a narrow bed and put her legs up. She breathed deeply, and slowly her vision returned. She meant to sit up and apologize, but the nurse who was still standing next to her prevented her from doing so. Please, don't sit up yet, Miss Kyle. We don't want you to faint again. A couple of minutes later, the doctor returned and smiled at her. Are you feeling better? We'll conduct an ultrasound in order to confirm the pregnancy, before we talk about everything else. Sometimes blood tests may lead to false diagnosis. We'd rather be sure. Monsieur nodded weakly. Of course she had already knew the diagnosis was false. Had to be false. I mean, the only thing that she's ever been banging has been Haruka, and, well, last I checked, Haruka's not a transvestite. But the doctor would most likely only believe her if she saw it with her own eyes. The doctor prepared the test, and then looked down intently onto the small screen. The fuzzy black and white structures and spiral held no meaning for Masiru, so she waited patiently for the diagnosis, inexplicably nervous, as though it was absurd. Ah, there we have it, the doctor said. Here you can see the embryo quite clearly. I think you are probably in the 6th to 8th week. She looked at Masiru for a moment concernedly. She nodded quietly. So she told her doctor that she had to be wrong, that it was impossible what she had believed to have been found. But both tests turned out positive. The blood test and ultrasound. She felt her stomach turn again, and forced herself to continue breathing deeply. When she had finally been allowed to leave, provided with a vast amount of information impossible to ever remember, her legs had fairly followed the way to the pool on their own account. As to her own astonishment, she found herself in front of it when she looked up. Well, she brought her bathing suit anyways, and maybe this was exactly what she needed. A place to stay quietly. The indoor pool was empty, as usual, and one of the reasons she liked coming here so much. But today, the water was unable to calm her. She was feeling sick, and she didn't know whether it was sheer horror or the fact that she tried to push the thought away, but it proved to be impossible. Finally, she gave up, wrapped herself into a towel, and sat down on a small bench at the edge of a pool. She took a few deep breaths and leaned back, pulling her legs toward her stomach to fight the nausea. She laid on her forehead against her knees and closed her eyes, but her thoughts didn't stop spinning. The doctor had to have made a mistake. It was absurd, impossible. But what if she didn't? A small voice kept nagging in the back of her head. Yes, what if not? 2 positive tests, and the signals her body was sending. What was happening to her? What was happening to her body? She had never been with a man in her entire life. Or had she? How else could a child form in her womb, if it really existed? She felt herself shaking and wondered vaguely where she might be cold.
Not to, men- not to mention all the other possibilities concerning this world: demon infection, ghost, Pharaoh 90 trying to get revenge. Haruka. She wanted to call Haruka and be taken home, but what was he supposed to tell her? What was she going to say? Would she believe that she didn't know what would happen? How would her beloved believe it? If she found herself unbelievable? She couldn't go home like this. But it simply couldn't be. How? A new thought slipped her mind, even more horrible than the previous one. What if it was a demon, implanted by an enemy? It seemed even more absurd than her first thought, and yet a new wave of nausea hit her as she felt deadness on her knees. Was she crying? She didn't know how long she had been sitting like this, until suddenly she felt a light touch on her shoulder. Shiru? She lifted her head and looked into the blue, worried eyes of Ami Mizuno. Oh, Ami. See, her voice didn't comply, and the words came out in a whisper, barely audible. Shiru, what? Ami stopped as Shiru laid her head back onto her knees, unable to deal with the question. She felt warm arms close around her, and after a long moment, gratefully leaned against her friend. Shall I call Haruka, maybe? She finally heard Ami's hesitant voice. Shiru shook her head. No, please, don't. She answered softly. All right, Ami said slowly. Well then, maybe you would like to come to my place? The pool will close soon, and you'll catch a cold sitting here like this. I'll make some tea for you, all right? Gently, but decidedly, she detached Shiru's arms from her legs, until which she was still holding tightly, and pulled her into a standing position. Shiru nodded with a vague feeling of relief that someone else took control of the situation, and allowed herself to be pulled toward the showers. Half an hour later, Shiru and Ami sat at a low table in Ami's room. Each had a cup of herbal tea steaming in front of her. Shiru stared slowly, swirling liquid. Ami was sitting quietly in front of her, taking sips of her own tea. What now? Should she tell her what happened? Of the four entered Setsi, Ami was the closest to her, even though she liked all of them very much and shared something with each of them. With Makoto, she exchanged recipes. Rei, she could discuss her premonitions, and Minako was the ideal shopping partner. But with Ami, it was different, and it started with the watershed sea being the only one able to hold herself against her, even beat her occasionally, in the water, and so they met up from time to time to compete against each other, or simply swim with someone who loved the water as an equal degree. In doing so, they had noticed how well they went together. They could sit together for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes quietly, often with a book, each lost in their own world, and at the same time they complemented each other very well, with Ami's intellect and Shiru's intuition. When does Makoto come home? She asked very undecidedly. Makoto and Ami lived together as flatmates since they started their studies, and had two tiny rooms close to the campus of Tokyo U. She has to work tonight. She said she'll be late, Ami replied. She turned to the window and looked outside. Dusk had fallen, and Ami's small, sparsely furnished room, with her neatly folded futon, the low table and bookshelf, a small wall closet, and a desk, was alight. Haruka would worry if she didn't return home soon. Would Ami believe her? She lifted her cup to sip her tea, but her hands were shaking so hot that she spilled the hot liquid. Shiru! Alarmed, Ami took the cup away and hastily pulled her toward the bathroom, where she could let the cold water run over Shiru's hands. For goodness sake, Shiru, what's wrong? She asked very softly, while both watched the fast-flowing element. Shiru felt her hands become numb. I went to the doctor today, she finally said. The doctor told me I'm with child. Her voice became quieter with every word, as she saw Ami lean closer toward her in order to understand her despite her running water. Ami's eyes widened as she turned off the water. With child? She repeated slowly. After a long pause, she asked, which test did she conduct? Monsieur described to her, and she nodded. So, it wasn't planned then, was it? Planned? Monsieur replied, confused. How? Well, you know, there are ways to... Ami made a fake hand moment and blushed.
Oh, I see. Mishiro laughed, despite everything, and thought how it was just as well Ami wasn't aiming to be a gynecologist. She shook her head. No, else I wouldn't. I don't understand how. Yes, of course, Ami said as he trailed off and looked at her intently for a moment. Don't worry. We'll find out what happened.
Pregnant. Mishiro Kaio, of all people, had just told her she was pregnant, and that she didn't know how she came to be so. She was waiting for Minako to come with her with a similar revelation every day. Even though the question for Minako wouldn't be how, but rather who. But Mishiro? Her head was spinning with possibilities, and she only had to guess how Mishiro had to feel. Logic. She had to approach this problem logically. There had to be an explanation. She ruled out the possibility of a mistake when Mishiro showed her the ultrasound, after they had returned her to her room and sat down again. Usually, it wasn't hard to determine how a child came to be, of course. Still, in Mishiro's case, she could neither believe that she would betray Haruka, nor that she would behave like this as she had. The usually so well-composed young woman looked completely lost. Momentarily, she was sitting apprehensively in front of Ami, her hands kneading and straightening like the thin fabric of her light blue skirt. Still, she had to ask.
I guess we can rule out the option that you slept with a man, willingly or
She hesitated, but forced herself to continue.
unwillingly.
Mishiro nodded, looking faintly relieved.
Yes, I didn't. I mean, I think I did, but else how?
She stopped, a fearful expression taking over.
Well,
It was not very likely, but still.
what could very likely happen, though I think it's still quite unlikely, is that you were drunk and don't remember.
Mishiro's eyes widened as he paled a little further.
Oh, I see. But I don't think it's likely.
And Ami repeated surlily.
But still, just to rule it out, do you know how far along you are?
The doctor said 6th to 8th week.
All right.
Ami said, thinking through what her professor had said on the matter.
In this period of time, do you have any memory gaps? Woke up anywhere and couldn't remember how you came to be there? Fell asleep in an unusual place?
As Mishiro shook her head, she smiled.
Or even slept alone anywhere in the hall? Normally Haruka is with you, isn't she?
Mishiro gave a very tiny smile back.
Well, it does happen that I sleep alone, but when we cannot accompany each other to concerts or races. But 2 months ago, Yusaki's wedding took place after all, and we were both here all the time. All right,
Ami noted. He supposed that she had covered any biological natural possibilities. Not that she had really believed any of those scenarios to be realistic in the first place. So, on to the next step.
We could rule out this then. That means the last possibility remains. We are facing a phenomenon which is not explicable by the rules of biology. I think this is most likely the case, and after experiencing magical transformations, time traveling, and seeing people changing their gender at will, I find natural science, as it is taught at university, often quite lacking.
She stopped herself from digressing too far and referred to the problem at hand.
What is most important, however, is to determine if it is of evil or benevolent origin.
She concluded. Mishiro's face lost color again. She looked paper white now. Probably she had also thought of this possibility already. Or had she even seen anything? Why was she so frightened? A child of evil supernatural origin would certainly be the worst case scenario. As he didn't say anything, Ami prompted softly.
Did you have any premonitions recently?
She shook her head.
No, there was nothing. I also feel no evil airs to your aura. The sea is quiet, as always.
There was a hysterical edge to Monsieur's voice. Ami's thoughts were racing. How could they best determine the child's origin? Well, supernatural forces did require supernatural powers, didn't they? So she asked,
Did you look into the mirror?
Not recently, Monsieur replied, eyes widening at the thought. She closed her eyes, and between her glowing hands the deep aqua mirror materialized. Ami smiled and nodded. They held Monsieur's mirror and her computer. She summoned it as well and started typing while Monsieur gazed into the mirror. After a few moments, a graph of Monsieur appeared on the screen, and provided her with the required data. And yes, there it was. The child. The tiny embryo as of now, but already clearly recognizable. It was undeniable.
The computer confirms pregnancy, she finally said. The child seems to be perfectly all right, though there is no data indicating any negative energy or anything unusual at all. It seems to be a perfectly normal child. But of course, the computer can't determine how it was conceived.
To her surprise, instead of looking relieved, she saw how Michiru nodded tensely. She was looking through the mirror with a deep frown marring her face. She waited a little longer until she couldn't bear the tension any more and asked,
Have you seen anything?
Michiru hesitated and closed her eyes for a moment. Finally, she said,
The mirror shows me the small lady and Hotaru playing together in the garden. Both are toddlers, about 1 year old, but they never really had the same age, and neither have they played together when one of them was a toddler, as far as I know at least. A visit for the future?
Ami wondered.
I know that Usagi and Mamoru hope now that they are married that Usagi will conceive Chibiusa soon, but Hotaru?
She saw a shadow pass over Michiru's face and looked at her thoughtfully, at still flat stomach.
Might this child be?
She had to call Usagi and ask her to take a test. Alarmed, she noticed Michiru was swaying softly. She was holding tightly onto the edge of the table and closed her eyes. Her face had lost all color.
Michiru?
She quickly got up and leaned over to her.
Are you all right? Would you like to lie down for a moment? No, I'm fine. I just need a minute.
Michiru opened her eyes with apparent effort and smiled weakly. Ami shook her head. She knew that by now that Michiru could hardly bear to show any weakness, in front of everyone but Haruka, and sometimes also her friends. She confessed her to lie down, and the ease which she achieved betrayed to her how Michiru was truly failing. She went into the little kitchen to make some more tea, and left Michiru a moment to herself to regain her composure. Could it be possible that Hotaru was reborn in this child? They had wondered whether the sentient death of rebirth would find her way back into life again, or whether she was only reborn if needed. It didn't look like that was the case at the moment, and even if she was reborn somewhere, they would hardly learn of it until she awoke. Michiru had relayed the girl's last words to her. Hotaru had wished for a normal childhood, and after she had overcome the shock about the child's death, she understood this desire only too well. Just as Michiru had felt incredibly sorry about that child, hardly reborn into a new life, had been summoned to duty again, instead of finally receiving a chance to experience a normal childhood. She had aged about 10 years in 1 year's time and spent a big deal of this fighting. She had often wondered what she was going to do to the girl, or where she was supposed to take her experiences, memories, and trust into the world. From her past life, which probably had even been dire. Even though Hotaru's death had shaken them all, she had been surprised back then at how heavily Michiru and Haruka had been affected, even more than Usagi. If Hotaru was to be reborn, she wouldn't be surprised if she chose who had loved her like their own daughter, even without being related by blood in their past life as her parents. She was uncertain whether Michiru shared her hunch about the child's identity, or whether she should mention it. In no case, she wanted to raise hopes which might not be fulfilled. However, if this child was really Hotaru, she would be thrilled to find out however this worked genetically. About 1 hour afterwards, Michiru sat quietly next to Haruka in the car, and watched Tokyo's sparkling nighttime skyline pass by. As there was nothing else Ami and she could find out tonight, visiting Ray tomorrow might be another option. And finding 3 missed calls by her beloved, she had finally decided that she needed to face Haruka and ask her to fetch her. Talking to the level-headed Ami helped. She wasn't feeling close to breaking down anymore. Ami had even tried to reassure her that telling Haruka was going to be perfectly fine, which she found sweet and a little funny considering the fact that the quiet girl was usually rather terrified by Haruka's short-tempered manner. But she was right, of course. With Haruka wasn't like that. Usually. Haruka had been quiet ever since they had left Ami's place, except for once on the whole highway, when she asked bewilderingly what was wrong, and Michiru told her to wait. For while she had settled on telling her tonight, she was certainly not going to do so while Haruka was driving. Haruka had nodded, but Michiru noted the tech monitor rise further. Tech monitor? You mean speedometer. She had debated denying something being wrong, but she didn't know yet if there was, after all. A little while later, they were sitting together in the kitchen in front of a hastily prepared salad. Missy had poured herself some more tea, trying to calm her stomach, which didn't seem to care at all, as she now knew the reason for her nausea. She held the cup tightly with both hands and kept her eyes trained on it, unable to look into Haruko's eyes now that they sat facing each other, and the time had come to tell her. Even though neither had spoken the thought, Ami said he probably thought the same. This child might be Hotaru. It might, but they had no proof, except for a printed picture inside her mirror. But Ami had probably dared not speak the thought, and she knew neither whether to tell Haruka about it. What if it wasn't Hotaru? She concentrated on the small life inside her, and noticed to her astonishment a slight glowing. She couldn't place the aura. It seemed familiar, but this might also result from the child being a part of her. Maybe Ray would recognize it. She felt Haruka's eyes rest on her and looked up. "You are eating," she said quietly. "You neither," she replied Haruka, and her eyes narrowed. "Michiru." She looked back at her cup and watched the liquid swaying back and forth slightly, put into motion by her shaking hands. Will you promise to hear me out till the end?" Michiru said finally. Haruka's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded. And so she told her that she had been feeling sick recently. "Do you think I wouldn't notice?" That she had visited a doctor at all. "Oh, I didn't know it was that bad." And what the doctor had said. At this point, her beloved was at a loss for words, and her jaw set, but she nodded mutely and motioned for her to continue. She told her about Ami's logic exercise, which had narrowed down the possibilities, and Haruka chuckled slightly. Some weight had lifted off her heart, and she agreed with Ami. She relayed the results that Ami's computers had provided her, and saw Haruka's astonishment about this final proof. Ami's computer did not err. Then she stopped and hesitated. Should she tell her what she had saw in the mirror? But Haruka was listening to her worriedly, no distrust in her gaze. How she was supposed to keep secrets from her? And she looked at her like that despite her telling that she was inexplicably with child. "And I looked into my mirror," she continued therefore, "and that there were Chibiusa and Hotaru's toddlers, maybe 1 year old. They were playing in the garden. In our garden," she added, surprised in her sudden realization. "And Ami said that Usagi and Mamo hope that Usagi will soon conceive small lady." Haruka made a face at the implication of Chibiusa's conception. Then her face lit up. "You mean—" "No, I mean, yes. No, I mean to say maybe, but—" Mashiro's throat felt suddenly tight. "I understand." Haruka reached across the table, catching her shaking hands in her own, and held them tight. She looked into Mashiro's eyes thoughtfully for a moment. "You know, recently I dreamed quite often about our little princess," she said slowly. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make you sad. Both of us and Hotaru and Setsuo in our house, it was a little like in the past, and yet it wasn't a memory." "I see," Mishiro whispered, wondering if she dared to hope. This night, Haruka held her as tight as she had sometimes turned out in the past when the attacks were numbing and the enemy was drawing closer, expressing her concern for her beloved in words that had never been her strength. And so, Mishiro fell asleep, reassured, despite the thoughts still spinning in her head. Ray was sweeping the shrine's courtyard. Summer was drawing to a close, and the acorn trees started to turn red. She glanced toward the stairs. No one there yet. Mishiro had called 2 hours ago, and asked whether he might come by together with Haruka in the late afternoon. She hadn't mentioned what caused the sudden visit. It was rare for the couple to come to the shrine alone. Occasionally, she met up with Mishiro in order to exchange thoughts in case one of them had a vision or premonition, and of course, both of them attended if the whole group assembled at the shrine. But this? Calmly and methodically, she continued sleeping, almost perfected to meditation. Finally, she heard steps approach, which made her look up from her task as she saw the couple ascend the stairs. Something was off. By now she had saw and felt things like this immediately. A certain tension. Worry? Hopefully Mishiro hadn't had a vision protecting evil.
She was so glad that finally peace reigned, and for years neither of them had seen a serious threat. She had hoped so much they had been granted a little more peace. She put her broom down and greeted them. Together they went inside. Ray offered tea, and they sat down by the low table, Mishira kneeling, and Haruka cross-legged, like usual. But except it was nothing like usual. She thought she had frowned at the concerned glances Haruka was throwing at her beloved, half-hidden. Mishira was pale and looked exhausted. Was she ill? But it didn't feel like it. "May I ask what brought you here today?" she finally asked. Mishira took a deep breath, and her hands closed around her teacup as if searching for hold. She looked at Ray. "Yesterday I learned that I'm with child." Ray couldn't suppress a surprise. "Oh, so that's how it was. But how?" Her astonishment must have shown on her face, but Mishira smiled for a moment and continued. "Yes, I was surprised as well, as you could probably well imagine. By chance I met Ami, and she helped me gain a little more insight. The child must be of supernatural origin, and we hope that she isn't evil. I feel nothing threatening, and Ami's computer neither discerned anything bad." She paused a moment. Haruka moved to put a reassuring hand on the small of her back, and her face relaxed a little. "We, that is, Ami, Haruka, and I, also hope that it might be Hotaru, for I have seen her yesterday in my mirror, and Haruka's seen her recently in her dreams. But I cannot read the child's aura, and I hope you might be able to see more." Mishira's broke a little as he stopped, looking at her cup still clenched tightly in her hands. Ray nodded slowly. "Hotaru, this would be wonderful." She hadn't guessed anything, hadn't seen, but she had only looked for threats. The deduction seemed quite likely to her. Haruka wasn't particularly clairvoyant, but it would concern her almost as much as it did Mishiro. It might as well have been a vision what she saw. Still, she didn't let her thoughts show on her face, since she guessed how hard it was for both her friends to allow this thought, this hope, fearing to be disappointed. And if it wasn't Hotaru, where did the child come from? She moved a little closer to Mishiro. "May I?" She nodded, and laid slightly a hand on her stomach, closing her eyes. Yes, there was truly a child. She felt the aura, warm and familiar. No, this certainly wasn't a threat. She looked further, trying to remember Hotaru's aura. Finally, she reached the essence. A warm violet glow. Saturn and Hotaru at once, free of the sadness which had accompanied her so often during her past lives. A smile formed on her face. She opened her eyes once more and nodded. "You're right, Monsieur. This is Hotaru's aura. She is truly being reborn." Both looked at her speechlessly and smiled more broadly. "Congratulations." "Yes, that's exactly what Ray said. That's just what you assumed, isn't it?" Haruka heard Monsieur's voice quietly come from the kitchen, as she sat down with her laptop on the sofa and opened it. She had yet to read 2 papers for her seminar tomorrow, a task which she had postponed until the last minute, as so often, and when the telephone rang a few minutes ago, she had forwarded Ami to Monsieur, that she had decided finally had to get to work. Not that she had very high hopes to be able to concentrate on the finer details of hydraulics at the moment. Monsieur's revelation yesterday, and Ray's confirmation today, had caught her quite off balance. She had no shortage of experiencing unbelievable things since she had met Monsieur and took hold of her Henson sink. But this surpassed everything in her eyes. Even though an unexpected pregnancy would be for most couples be surprising, but much more normal than the problems which came with realizing that the mystical talismans one had been looking for were found in the heart of your beloved, and that she would most likely have to die for it. But of course, it was different from them. Honestly, she was utterly, but not unpleasantly, surprised by the events. There was rather an overwhelming feeling of relief, for she had secretly always harbored a nagging feeling of guilt when she thought of Hotaru. At first, she had put all her energy into killing Hotaru. Then, later, when she loved her like her own child, she had taken her starseed and with her, life. And only 3 months after Usagi had saved him, she had really died. Of her own will, it could almost seem certain, and Haruka had often wondered whether it wasn't her fault after all. But as she returned now, to Mishira and her of all people, then not only did she receive her opportunity, to let her live the childhood she had wished for and redeem herself. But in this case, the girl's death maybe hadn't been her fault at all. Still, she was glad not to carry the child to term herself. In the time when she had taken care of Hotaru, Michiru had always been the motherly of the three, and she had convinced Haruka that she had wished to carry a child herself once. Not now, but once. I wish Haruka didn't share, at least at the moment. So maybe it was going to be all right for her fair beloved. Still, she thought shortly back to the moment when Ray had confirmed the child was carrying was Miss Hotaru. Her face had lost all color, and she had all but fainted. Luckily, she was sitting on the floor, and they were able to lie her down quickly. Last night, when she had trembled in her arms. She had sighed softly, finally opened the folder in which she had saved the papers and started reading, without absorbing any information at all. Yes. See you Sunday, Ami, Michiru said as he ended the call with a beep. On Sunday, all of them were going to meet up in Yoyogi Park to watch the first autumn leaves and enjoy the last warm days. She sank down in a chair in the kitchen, laying the phone next to her on the table. Her head hurt as she slowly massaged her temples, trying to ease the pain. She had another rehearsal tomorrow after classes, and an important concert on Saturday. She had a feeling that the sickness and dizzying with... Sorry? She had the feeling that the sickness and dizzying were increasing each day. Maybe it was the stress and not the pregnancy. Angrily, she wiped a few tears from her cheeks. I'm sorry, little one. I'm so happy that you're coming back to us. It's just a little overwhelming, she whispered, running one hand softly over her stomach. And she really was. Wonderful chance to be able to have a child herself, to have her little princess back at once. But at the same time she felt confused, afraid, not quite ready to deal with all that was happening. What was she going to do with university? Her jobs? What was she going to tell her parents who disapproved already of her relationship with Haruka and would certainly disapprove of a pregnancy she couldn't present a father for? What if she lost a child? What if she hurt her unconsciously, not knowing about the little life inside her? Had she drank alcohol recently? She didn't think so. She had lost all taste for it in the past few months. As she now knew why, certainly, but still. Michiru? Everything all right? Haruka came into the kitchen, looking worried. She tried to smile up at her reassuringly and nodded, not trusting her voice. In a movement, Haruka was by her side and pulled her into an embrace, murmuring sweet nothings to her and rocking her gently. She held on to her, her fear waning, feeling quite comforted and safe. She was having Haruka by her side, and that was most important at all. The end. Wait, the end? No! 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 You do not end it there! Oh no! 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 You have officially just left me hanging. There's so much more you could do with this little subject. I mean, no, I want to know more. If you were to add chapters to this, I would so read this. I would so read this every single Friday until you have done. I mean, how does Haruka Michiru handle this? What about Setsuna's reaction to the news? No. What about Minako? Is he going to overreact? Oh, so many questions in my head. No. How's Michiru's entire life going to live by now this? What are Michiru's cravings? Is there going to be a double labor? Is Michiru and Yusagi going to labor at the same time? Which would be hilarious. I would love to see that. Is Haruka still going to get over her little bit of her nervousness? What about the reactions of the parents? No. Is Mama-chan going to faint after it? I'm going to bet he's going to faint. Are they going to come up with a cover story? Is Yusagi going to have to use the to make a pet to be able to create a convincing lie? Oh my god, so many questions. Answer this. You do not leave it on this. No. I'm not this disappointed just because you ended it off with a really sweet moment between Haruka and Michiru hugging each other and holding each other. That was a nice way to end it. And Act 1! But I feel like there is more to this story. There is more to be told. This is not like that Yu-Gi-Oh story I read, Twist, where it had a really good dark feel to it and something could be added. No. This is more like and giving me a story where Applejack pops up, tells the main six, I'm pregnant. And you end it off like that. Yeah, that's a nice way to end a act, but that is no way to end a story. As for the story itself, I have to admit, yeah, there are some grammar issues coming out the wazoo. Plenty of misplaced commas here and there. So certain run-on sentences, and this author has an odd quirk considering quotation marks, as in some of the quotation marks pop up upside down on some paragraphs. I don't know whether it's because this is the way the author speaks, or this is the word program, or this is just fanfics.net being its usual self, i.e., the pit of voles. I do like the characters. Ami and Ray were very much in character. Mitsuru having her own doubts, which we had seen, because as we all know, Mitsuru, of the two, Haruka Mitsuru is the weaker of the two, so she needed to be supportive, and she needed a support. And also, I love the fact that she's dealing with all these conflicting emotions. And all of her complaints and fears were quite reasonable. I also like the fact that we were seeing just how much this was affecting her personally. Because as we all know, she's the softer of the two outers. She's going to feel the most distress. She's going to feel the most pain about this. And of course, she's going to feel the most fear. And reasonably, it makes sense because, let's face it, you're a lesbian and you admit that you never had never had relations with a man. There are going to be several theories that could be unpleasant to think about, especially when you're a warrior of love and justice. I also love Haruka in this, being supportive yet understandably worried and probably fighting with herself. If I had a few complaints, it would be the following. 1. No Usagi. I mean, I would love to see Usagi's reaction to the fact that 1. Hotaru's coming back. 2. Chibiusa and her are going to grow up together. 3. Mitsuru's pregnant. Oh my gosh, you're pregnant! Oh, this is so exciting! I'm so happy for you! I can't believe this is going to happen! Oh, we got so much to do! Oh, so many cakes to do! Actually, I think Usagi would so jump for joy at this and give her a chance to hug and talk to one another about this. That would be another entertaining bit. Ever watched 9 Months? Yeah, I actually enjoyed that movie. I would so totally love to see a story with Haruka Mitsuru going through a 9-month style story with Usagi playing the other side. Makoto and Minako's reactions would be nice too. And what about seeing her Setsuna to all this? It would be really nice to allow the sensei to explore. I mean, granted, it did fine with the cast that we have, but I kind of want to see the other sensei's reactions to this, because I would love to see the cast, unless this author, of course, feels like they couldn't write them. I perfectly understand, because, sometimes certain characters as a writer come to me hard as well. Piggy! My other complaint is that even though she got reborn, and I'll tell you one thing, that news almost prevented me from reading this. I wonder if it was really necessary to kill off poor Hotaru. But then I realized, yes, so the soul could be transmuted over to Mitsuru's body. Although, personally, I would have loved a little time travel thing where time reset and Mitsuru popped up pregnant and she didn't know how. And all their memories of Hotaru had left her. Still, wishing stars are loser or dicks. I mean it. Oh, I want a normal life. Okay, I'm killing you. I mean, really? You could have thought of any other way. Ehud! And also, despite the fact that this is well written, I didn't feel the emotions that I think the author was supposed to come up with. I don't know why. I think Hotaru's death may have came a little too fast, or some of the things felt a little rushed. Like the author wanted to get to certain plot points really, really quick, so this prevented some of the impact from happening. On the other hand, some of these moments were really, really heartwarming. And it still felt good, especially Haruka Michiru's moments. I guess I'm saying this because I really love Haruka Michiru. One final note to add, and this is going to be selfish with me, but Mr. Author, you stole my idea, you miserable, no good Nick. I mean, years ago, when I finally started appreciating lesbians, I came up with an idea. Well, not appreciating them, that wouldn't come until Pony, but, well, you know what I mean. When I stopped being an a-hole, I came up with an idea of wanting to see a fanfiction where Michiru where Michiru was pregnant with Haruka's child, that there was some other way, because I was getting tired of seeing all the M-Preg stories that I've been finding. And believe me, there are billions of them. I was getting tired of seeing M-Preg stories so many freaking times, and I just couldn't believe that there was none for Haruka and Michiru, the most prominent lesbian couple in all anime. But nope, nope, no child, no child, no fempreg, no nothing. Heck, I could only get that with Pony, and boy, do they have a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, we've got gender swap, magic, powerful magic spells, and if you go by the winning verse, a very, very powerful love magic that happens between two couples that love each other so much. Although, my personal theory that this isn't just Michiru. Want to know my personal theory about why Michiru's pregnant? Go closer, audience. A little closer. I think she's 1/3 Asari. Yeah. An Asari got a Earth woman knocked up millennia ago, and those genes passed down the line until, boom, they formed Michiru. Yes, I made a Mass Effect joke, and in case you're wondering, yes, my shepherd has had romances with Liara. Thank you very much. I do write that stuff. Well, I think next week we'll probably find something else that'll be just exciting. Well, maybe like I'll do an. I do know Arcade Striker's got a couple of other interesting fanfics, and I do know of another live reader that has her own stories out there. Maybe I'll give them a quick read. Maybe not. I'll be seeing you next time, my lovely little readers.